Hello, Melissa Crook here. This was supposed to be live this morning, but something's not working in my technology to allow that. So, welcome to a recorded Empowerment Tuesday that I will be releasing as soon as I'm done recording here on Substack as well as our podcast platforms. I'm your host, Melissa Crook. Welcome to the Feel Podcast. Today, I am talking about on this Empowerment Tuesday and the last week of season 10 and our summer of Feel here at the Embracing Layers Network and Feel podcast, where we've been celebrating 5 years of Feel, 5 years since this whole thing started back in July of 2021. So, welcome. And we're going to wrap it up with the conversation that's very personal to me. We're going to be talking about breaking free from codependent, people pleasing, trauma bonded relationships. This is something I have a lot of experience in. Codependency is also a word and a definition I didn't really understand, actually, until my therapist introduced it to me. I think my kids had mentioned it in passing, but not like directly. And I still, I knew about it, I'd heard about it, I didn't really understand it. And I especially didn't understand how so many of my relationships were functioning this way. Some by choice and not wanting to change, and others because that's how I started them. That's how I elicited them. That's how I responded in them. And it was actually in my own immediate family with my daughters and husband. They were like, we don't need you to show up this way. We don't need you to feel like you have to be responsible for all of us and our feelings and everything that's going on. We've got it. You take care of you, and we'll ask you if we need X, Y, and Z. But we don't expect you, nor do we want you to have to feel like or show up that way. We've got it. And so that conversation happened a few years across the spectrum, not in one setting, but in different ways as my kids were going into adulthood. And as my husband was kind of like, I'm noticing this is coming up for you more and more. It seems to be impacting other areas. And we'd have these conversations, but I still don't really understand it. And I didn't even know if I agreed with it because I was functioning from a space of really feeling like this is how I was valued. This is how I was expected to show up. This is what made me important in the relationship and necessary and all of these things. And so when I really dove deep 6 years ago, this coming fall, and my therapist started asking me about my relationships and then to describe them, this came up, this topic of codependency and trauma bonds. And boy, once she explained it to me, I was like, the fire just came out of my head, like, oh my gosh. And it was just a big, like, holy cow, this is squarely where I've been living. And also, I didn't know that's not how I didn't know that was unhealthy. I didn't know that's not what was expected because it was literally the whole system I was brought up in growing up and was still expected to show up in many ways and showed up in those ways in my workspaces and other social spaces. And so it was very eye-opening to me. And it was deeply connected to areas where I had trouble saying no, where I had trouble setting healthy boundaries, where I felt guilty because I'd heard narratives my whole life about you show up for family, you show up for blood, you show up for your these friends, no matter what, no matter the cost. People show up for each other. They drop everything. And there can be those situations where emergencies happen and you need to drop everything and show up, but not every day, all the time, for every single thing that's happening. And not when you shove things under the rug and use a trauma as an excuse to come together and bond, rather than healing and talking about the truth of the impact and all these things. And so this became a very big part of my unpacking story, my narrative of unlearning and relearning what healthy relationships look like. It also has caused some spaces and places where I love people from a distance now, and I have some boundaries. Because when you make these shifts and you recognize these things that are happening, some relationships, like my immediate family, are like, oh, thank goodness. She gets it now. She's showing up in a way that's healthy. This makes sense. It's honoring to everybody. And there's other relationships that don't want to change. They want you to keep showing up that way and they don't understand. And you can't make them understand something if they don't want to understand it. And getting past the feeling guilty and noticing the settling in your system when you're not expected to be the one who comes in and puts out everybody's fires and makes sure everybody's okay all the time, every day for all the things. So this is a bit, like I said, a very personal one for me. The other thing that I think is important to mention is people hear this term a lot, but we don't necessarily a lot of people don't really understand what it means. We hear a lot of jokes about it. You'll hear the show Everybody Loves Raymond. If you're of my generation, if you're a little younger, Google it. That was a prime example of codependent relationships. And we can kind of laugh about it, but there's also a lot of truth to it and some things that are worth looking at and how hard it is because these kinds of relationships are very embedded in many family systems, many cultures. And so unpacking, like, how do I still show up for my family in an honoring way, but that also honors me? And I'm able to have some healthy boundaries. We love each other. And also, I need to figure out how to create space for myself to fill my cup and not take on responsibility for others people's lives in a way that's not actually mine to manage and handle. So I'm going to give you a definition of codependency. If you're like, yeah, I've heard the word, I don't totally understand it, or you just need to hear what it is again as a reminder, and also think about your relationships or people you know's relationships. And if there's some things that need to be examined here, I'm going to go into that a little bit today. So codependency is a relationship pattern in which a person's sense of well-being, worth, security, or identity becomes overly dependent on taking care of, pleasing, managing, rescuing, or gaining approval from another person or people group, often often at the expense of their own needs, boundaries, feelings, or values. These are all things that are very squarely a part of the feel framework and the things that we talk about on here. Those boundaries, those feelings, those values. It's important to note that codependency is not a formal mental health diagnosis and the term can be used too broadly. And that's why I wanted to mention it to you, is let's make sure we understand what it actually means. Because like many terms, sometimes we overuse it or use it in an incorrect way. And it's important to get this right so so that we can approach our relationships in a healthy manner and heal and shift in the ways that we need to based on an accurate definition of what it is. Um, Caring deeply for others, making sacrifices, or depending on people you love does not automatically make someone codependent. A codependent relationship is a relationship in which these patterns become part of how the relationship functions. One person, or sometimes both people and or small groups of people, feel responsible for others' emotions, choices, problems, or happiness. Keeping the relationship stable can become more important than being honest about what each person actually needs and what each person's actually responsible for. Common patterns include difficulty saying no because of guilt or fear of disappointing someone, feeling responsible for another person's happiness, emotions, or reactions, consistently putting another person's needs ahead of your own, needing to feel needed in order to feel valuable, overfunctioning, rescuing, fixing, or taking responsibility for things that belong to someone else. Boy, this was me square in so many of my relationships, or a good portion of my life until the last 5 to 6 years, and really 3 to 4 years when I really, really addressed it and understood it and understood where I needed to shift some things and set some boundaries and take some pressure off myself for how I was showing up versus what was healthy and healthy relationships. Avoiding honest communication to prevent conflict or rejection. This is a big one, a big sweep under the rug dynamic. tolerating unhealthy behavior because setting a boundary might threaten the relationship, looking to another person for reassurance about your worth, decisions, or identity, resentment after repeatedly doing things you didn't really want to do, losing touch with your own preferences, needs, values, or identity within a relationship. One distinction that's particularly relevant to the themes that I've been identifying in my work for 5 years now, and so much of this went behind what created the FEEL framework and why it was necessary for me, and I see it as being so helpful for others that are wanting to make these shifts and recognizing that they're existing in these ways in the world that are really tapping them out. I want you to really listen to this carefully. Interdependence means I love you, support you, and sometimes sacrifice for you while remaining connected to myself. Codependency, maintaining our relationships, your approval, or your well being becomes so important that I repeatedly abandon myself to preserve it. So that maintaining our relationship approval, that person you're in relationship's approval, and their well being becomes so important that you yourself repeatedly will abandon yourself to preserve it. And codependency doesn't necessarily look dysfunctional from the outside. It's very common in family systems. Someone can appear extraordinarily helpful, dependable, generous, accommodating, selfless, or the person that everybody's counting on. The important question to ask is, what is your motivation for showing up this way? And what is it costing you to show up this way? And so that's where there's so much overlap here. You're like, gosh, these are a lot of the things I've been listening to you for a while. And I hear you talk about healthy boundaries and I hear you talk about values and emotions. This is some of the deepest work behind it because of these relationships I was in. This was a big motivator. So probably gives you context to how I came up with this through my own life, kind of accidentally on purpose, along with the help of my therapist and my inner immediate family and all those things, is because these were the ways I was showing up in relationships. And these are the areas I needed to really pay attention to. And I started recognizing as I was talking to other women, people in general, but women especially seem prone to these and family systems. I mean, this is one that crosses over in many ways. But these were the areas that were struggles. And this is what gets addressed and why it's so important to me is this is where self-abandonment really shows up, and the lack of self-trust, the lack of agency, the lack of boundaries, doing things to belong, so to speak, your self-worth. I mean, so many of things get wrapped up in these systems. So I really, really wanted to touch on that and make sure we hit on that really well today. So within that understanding of this, how codependency can develop is so many times we're born into it. It's in family systems, it's in faith-based systems, it's in cultural narratives. So this is something that is learned many times from the very beginning. And like I said earlier, you don't necessarily know it's unhealthy until you get outside of that system and you see some examples of healthy systems or talk with other people that aren't in codependent relationships. And you start realizing, oh, and when all of a sudden you're in a relationship that's not based on codependency, it is eye-opening to realize, oh, wow, that's not expected of me here. This is so much less exhausting and taxing than these other relationships. It gets your attention when you start hearing and seeing different narratives. Now, because you've been existing and operating like this so long, it still takes some time and energy and focus and intentionality to break out of these systems. But when you start recognizing it, you see, oh, there's another way to exist. It's very eye-opening. There's a big connection in these relationships between people pleasing and low self-worth because you have been brought up in these systems to believe that your value is based on how well you show up for everybody else. Um, and so, this is also where trauma bonds kind of run side by side. You might have a family system where you don't necessarily you have a lot of combativeness and you have a lot of unhealthy um, sarcasm as a joke, but it's really kind of biting narrative and back and forth in the way you communicate with each other. And you might kind of be at each other's throats all the time. But boy, something happens, something big happens, somebody passes away, or somebody's in an accident, or there's some kind of tragedy. Boy, you drop everything and come together, and you love each other so much, and can't imagine your life without these people and all these things, and you drop everything and just show up and throw yourself into the situation. That's and you're expected to. And if you don't, then you're abandoning your family and you're not putting them first. And blood is everything, in terms of blood relation. And you hear a lot of these narratives, and it's very like passionate and powerful, and it pulls you in so many ways. And it's not until you start seeing the impact or understanding or getting curious about the impact of this on you, and you start trying to set some healthy boundaries around where and you do and don't have the energy to show up that way, you can get some really serious pushback. And it's also kind of like, oh, this is trauma bonding. This is what happens when these things happen. Um, so setting boundaries in these relationships can be both very energy and sometimes life-saving for you because of the stress your body has been under showing up in this way in these relationships. But it can also really shift and change relationships. It took me a year and a half to really stop feeling guilty for not showing up in the codependent trauma bonded way, that I had been trained into in these relationships and in my family system. Before I realized, I knew all along I needed to do this for myself. I'd already noticed the impact of the energy in my system and the stress and the anxiety when I would go into these spaces that asked this of me and asked all of us to show up this way, not just me. We are all expected to show up this way. So I noticed that and the impact once I was aware, once I was present and noticing it and living in my body and not hypervigilant, disassociated from it. Because that comes a lot of times with this too. You're in a hypervigilant state, ready to show up, ready to drop all the things all the time. And in that hypervigilance, you really disassociate from all of the alarm bells that are going off in your body telling you, this isn't actually healthy and emotionally safe for you. So once you get in touch with that, and become aware of that, it's very conflicting because you're like, this is not good for my body to show up in this way, but also these relationships may not receive me this way anymore. And that's where the values work with me really comes in. Knowing your value, understanding and learning to trust yourself, and really believing that as you go through this and through time, you will find relationships and people will be drawn to you that are healthy, functioning themselves. And you will have healthy relationships with them and you'll be able to move forward with that. But it can be very difficult in between and very confusing because this whole system you've been brought in, you're dismantling now and realizing, oh my gosh, this actually isn't healthy for me. And you may find yourself dismantling one, but still being very in it in another. That was the case for me where I was dismantling this within my family systems and realizing the impact, but I was squarely in a codependent relationship scenario in my workplace. And it wasn't until I was out of that workplace that I realized, oh my gosh, I was showing up codependent here as well. So you start realizing and being aware of all these spaces and places that you've been showing up this way because you're so conditioned to. And it can be very both unsettling and relieving at the same time because you're noticing all of a sudden you're not setting your nervous system on fire anymore every time you go to drop everything to show up in these relationships in the way they expect you to. And also, they may not respond very well because they may try to make it, what's wrong with you? You've changed. You've abandoned us. You're going to hear a lot of language instead of curiosity of like, so what's going on with you? I've noticed a lot of shifts. If they don't want things to change and if they don't want things to shift, they're going to make you the problem instead of getting curious and starting to look at it for themselves. And that's not your responsibility. And that's also a very hard shift that happens. So I want to be real about that. I will also tell you, I've done this work. I continue to do this work. I continue to be aware of, I still have a tendency to try to show up and rescue, but I'm able to pull back now. I'm able to notice it. And I'll tell you, my nervous system is so much better off. I'm so much healthier within me because I've made this decision for myself. The lack of stress and anxiety that exists in my life regularly and daily, the lack of hypervigilance, the way I can stay present. And also there's a mourning period because these are relationships that unless these other people I was in relationship decide to make that same decision for themselves, are always going to be very different now. I'm relieved I don't have to show up that way anymore. I don't miss that part of it. And there's also memories within those relationships that are sad. And there's also relationships within those relationships that I don't have the same connection with um, because of the choices I've made. But I know every day that I could never go back to abandoning myself in that way and living in that state. So it's complex in this journey. So I don't want to simplify it to a point where we're not talking real about it. That's why I created this framework to support women and people that are trying to make these shifts with a framework and a support system and community here at the Embracing Layers Network, where we can help you walk this out. You don't feel alone. You can recognize and even role play the conversations that need to happen and know you've got a safe place to land as you're going through it and navigating it. Because our first inclination is when people resist the boundaries, is that we've done something wrong or we're selfish. And they're going to throw a lot of that language at you sometimes. Trust your inner knowing. Trust the settling in your nervous system when you're not showing up every time, quote unquote, things are on fire. Is as you do this over time, and it takes our nervous system time to recognize new patterns as safe because our nervous system relates what it knows, familiarity sometimes, and it'll take a while. The guilt's not going to go away overnight. But over time, as you continue to be consistent and continue to communicate and continue to notice what's healthy for you and continue to ask yourself every time something's asked of you, does this require me to abandon myself, my values, what I know is healthy for me? If the answer to that question is yes, then your answer to them has to be no. And it doesn't have to be mean or unkind. I mean, they're going to keep pushing to see if you will go back on your boundaries. And you'll say, I love you, but this is not an activity I'm engaging in. This is not a conversation I'm going to have. This is not a space or place where I'm going to drop anything. It's actually not my responsibility to fix that person's issue. I can support and in ways that are healthy, with my love and acceptance, and at the same time, I'm not going to engage. I'm not going to try to save everybody anymore. It's each of our own responsibility, especially as adults, to do that work within ourselves. And it becomes, it's very different. It's a very different way of thinking. You're all of a sudden, you're not taking responsibility for other people's emotions. You do still care, and they're gonna try to throw a lot of language at you sometimes. Where they try to make you feel like you don't care, and you do care. You just also care about you and your well-being and being received and loved as a human being, not a human doing, and received and loved because you exist in the world, not because of how you show up for people and what you do for them. I can't iterate enough how important this is to prioritize your own mental, emotional well-being. I've lived the impact it has on your physical when you don't. I don't want other people to get to this breaking point. And so that's why I have these conversations. And this is a big part of the conversation, these codependent trauma bonded relationships, recognizing them and having a framework and steps to help you work through it when you recognize and realize you need some support in making these shifts. And breaking the old relationship patterns can feel at times, it can feel uncomfortable and exhausting. There can be a lonely period as you make these shifts. All that is true, but also the sense of settling and rest, and not this constant energy, hypervigilance, anxiety that comes from living and waiting for the shoe to drop all the time. You're going to get energy back and clarity back and presence back that you didn't even know was possible. Um, and so within that too, you're going to discover how to really function in healthy relationships in a way that's going to bond you in a way that's truly loving, truly honoring, truly respectful, and truly with people that honestly want what's best for you. They want what's best for themselves. They're doing the work on themselves. And they also want that for you. They want you, and even if they disagree with the decision, they'll honor that if they know you're doing the thing that feels healthiest for you. So there's just a difference in how these healthier relationships look. It doesn't mean the people that you've been in codependent relationships don't love you. They just don't know how to function outside of it, and they don't want to, and you can't make them. Unfortunately, that's just not, I've learned that the hard way. You can over explain and talk until you're blue in the face, until they want to make a shift. You can simply be there when they're ready, if you choose to, and you have to decide within yourself how much proximity is healthy for me. And if they come back to you in a few months or a few days or for years and say, I see what you're talking about now, I've shifted, you still want to be careful with that proximity. You want to, give them space slowly to see if they've actually shifted or if they're just trying to pull you back in. So you have to be, and not in a spiteful way. They miss you, and they think they've done the things and they're saying the right things, but you still have to protect yourself and watch over time, because you'll figure out pretty quickly whether they've actually made the shifts or not. And then you determine how much space you're going to give them. And if you do decide to still function, in some proximity of these relationships, you're just very clear with your boundaries. Hey, we're coming today. We'll be there for about 2 hours and then we've got to go. Or we're coming today, but then if this topic comes up, I'm going to excuse myself from the topic and I'll go do something else. So you're communicating your expectations, your boundaries, you're showing up, you're clear. And if you can do that and still not abandon yourself, absolutely. So this doesn't necessarily mean relationships are just over and you're just loving everybody from afar all the time. It just, so be flexible and open to that as well. Just doing this in ways that honor your emotional safety, your bandwidth, your energy, your values, trusting when your body's sending you signals, and building a life and relationships that feel safe and healthy within that. So really the really big thing that happens here when you realize you're in codependent relationships and you need to make some shifts is the healthy boundaries. This is the big point. Setting boundaries can be uncomfortable, especially when you've spent years without them. When you finally establish a boundary with a friend, a family member, a loved one, a coworker, their reaction may reveal a lot about the dynamic you've shared. You may experience resistance, guilt, disappointment, or pressure to return to your old patterns, like I've mentioned already earlier. But remember, this is so key. Someone else's discomfort with your boundary doesn't automatically mean your boundary is wrong. Healthy relationships allow both people to have needs, identities, responsibilities for themselves, and spaces to grow. You can love and support someone without becoming responsible for them. You can care about someone without abandoning yourself. And you can choose your own healing without needing everyone around you to understand it. Your relationship with yourself matters. Breaking free from codependency, people pleasing, and trauma bonded relationships can be incredibly difficult, particularly when those patterns have existed for years or your whole life. But transformation requires remembering why you started. As you create healthier boundaries and learn to stop abandoning yourself for the sake of others, you discover something powerful. The relationship you build with yourself can become your strongest and most important relationship. Because when you show up healthy and well for yourself, then you're able to have the energy and presence and foresight to show up healthy and well for others. So some ways to engage with this week and to get started are start with some simple things. Give yourself some grace, give yourself some room to grow into this, but start setting a boundary or two with friends or family members you feel you have a codependent, people pleasing, or trauma bonded relationship with, or sometimes all of the above. They all go together, they're all very tightly entwined. Set a boundary you've been meaning to, and pay attention to how they react once you set it. You might receive resistance, but keep in mind your end goal and how you want to see your life shift in a healthy direction for you. If you need any help and support with this, get a hold of me. Go to embracinglayers.com to the contact form, reach out. Let's have a conversation. The calendar cleanse is a great way to kind of look at your boundaries and values to see if they're reflected in your calendar. You can get that for 50% off for another week here through next Monday. The link will be in our show notes for that, but you go to embracinglayers.com, go to our online course page, and then click on where you can buy the online courses. And then once you get to the Patreon page, go to shop. It'll take you to the 3 online courses. They're all 50% off. I mentioned the calendar cleanse because it really directly gives you a kind of a doable place to start with this, and then you can grow into the other areas as you get more comfortable. But it's available 50% off, $47. It's available for $23.50, $23.50 to invest in yourself and get you started on this journey. That's only available through August 31st. Also, you can schedule a 30-minute free empowerment session with me, and we can see which resources within my library are going to support and help you in a way that's going to allow you to be successful in this endeavor for yourself. So I hope you found this supportive and helpful today as we have tackled this topic that is complex and full of nuance, but so very important, because remember, you are valuable, you are worthy, and you get to choose the life that's healthy and aligned, living out of your values, trusting yourself, and knowing that you're worth investing in. Take good care of yourself. I'll be back next Tuesday with an empowerment session as we kick off our new fall season, season 11. I'm going to give you a preview of what's to come this fall, but take good care of yourselves this week. And thanks so much for being with me this Empowerment Tuesday on the Field podcast. We'll see you next time.